Hello, Year 10. I just want to give you some last minute top tips before your paper 2 for history, which is your Germany paper. So what you have in front of you is a copy of what the Germany paper will look like, the section A. So in section A, there are two questions. The first question is an inference question, and the second question is an explain why. So let's think about an inference question. Everybody in the year group will be getting full marks on an inference question because you don't need any own knowledge to answer it. You just need to think really carefully about your technique. So the first thing that you're going to do when you get this question in your exam is you're going to highlight the inquiry of the question itself. So in this case, if you look at your screen on the right hand side, it says question 1 and it says give 2 things you can infer from source A about Hitler's leadership of the Nazi Party in the 1920s. So in this case, the inquiry in the question is Hitler's leadership of the Nazi Party in the 1920s. You're then going to find 2 phrases or sentences in the source, which you can see on the left, that give you clues about that particular topic. Then what you're going to do is copy those clues straight across into the details section of the answer booklet. And when you've done that, you're going to work from the bottom of the booklet to the top, and you're going to add your inferences. Now you've practiced this a lot in lessons. It's exactly the same process, that highlighting the clues, putting them onto the page, and then writing your inference above. And you can check that you've written an inference by making sure that the wording of the inference doesn't use the same words as the detail. So the second question that you will face is an explain why question. It's worth 12 marks and you need to be spending about 15 minutes on this question. You're aiming for 3 paragraphs in those 15 minutes. So first of all, again, you're going to identify the topic in the question. So if you look on the right hand side of your screen, you've got the question there, explain why there was opposition in Germany to the Treaty of Versailles. So in this case, your topic is opposition. That means why were people opposed or against the Treaty of Versailles? Why didn't they like it? And you're going to begin your answer with the words of the question. So in this case, one reason why there was opposition in Germany to the Treaty of Versailles was. Then you're going to add detail to support this. That's your AO1, your key terms. And the way that you add detail to a point is by writing 2 words, for example. So one reason why there was opposition in Germany to the Treaty of Versailles was, whatever you think that reason was, for example, and you're going to give more details about it. You then need to explain why your point leads to opposition, and you're going to use the words this meant that. So one reason why there was opposition in Germany to the Treaty of Versailles was, for example, this meant that. And you're going to develop that and repeat that then 3 times. So one reason why, a second reason why, a final reason why. And remember, 15 minutes, guys, and that's your opportunity to really show off what you know. So once you've completed your inference question and your explain why question, you are going to move on to section B of your paper. Now for section B of your paper, you'll need the interpretations and sources booklet, which has 2 interpretations in it and 2 sources. 3A is a question that asks you how useful the sources are for an inquiry into, and in this case, the attitudes of young people towards the Hitler Youth movement. When we're asked how useful sources are, really we're being asked how do they help us to find out about a particular topic. Now, top tip here, the sources are always useful because otherwise you wouldn't have been given them. There'd be no point in them being there. So the way that we're going to remember our structure for this answer is JP COCO. So first of all, judgment. Source B is useful because it gives us information about, and in this case, attitudes of young people towards the Hitler Youth movement. We then need to think about why it's useful and how does it help us. So we can think about the provenance, and if you remember, the provenance of a source means who wrote it, when it was written, and what it is. So we could say it was written by whoever it was written by, which makes it useful because the information is likely to be accurate. We then, once we've dealt with the provenance, need to really think about what the source actually tells us and whether or not we think it's accurate. So we would introduce our content by writing the source says, And then this is useful because it's accurate. I know that. So this is a chance for you to put in any information that you have that supports what the source is saying, that matches it. So for example, if you had a source that said young people did not really support the Hitler Youth movement, you could say, well, this is useful because it's accurate. I know that the Edelweiss Pirates and the Swing Youth were groups that were set up that did not support the Hitler Youth movement. To really make your point clear, you're going to then write the source also says and pull out a quote. This is useful because it's accurate. I know that. And once you've done that for source B, you're going to repeat the same process for source C. So source C is useful because it gives us information about. It was written by whoever it was written by. You're going to find that out, which makes it useful because the information is likely to be accurate. And then you're going to go on and talk about content. So just remember, use whatever knowledge that you have to support the content. And then we come to 3B. And again, this is a question that everybody in the year is going to get full marks on because it doesn't require historical knowledge. It requires you to think about technique. So a 3B asks you to study interpretations 1 and 2. And you can see them there on the right of your screen. And it asks you, what is the main difference between these views? You've got to explain your answer using details from both interpretations. So what you're going to do before you write your answer is just spend 2 minutes planning it. So in this case, you're going to highlight again what's the topic in the question. And the topic in the question, it says, is the Hitler Youth movement. So you're going to look at interpretation 1 and you are going to highlight 2 sentences or 2 phrases in interpretation 1 which give you a clue about the Hitler Youth movement and about what young people thought about the Hitler Youth movement. And then you're going to do the same thing in interpretation 2. Highlight 2 sentences or phrases which give you clues about the attitudes of young people towards the Hitler Youth movement. And when you've done that, you have a bit of a plan for how you're going to construct your answer. You're then going to start your answer with interpretation 1 argues that, and you're going to summarise it in your own words. So imagine that your examiner has not seen the interpretation and you've got to describe to them what it's saying. You're then going to support it with a quote that you've highlighted. So it says, and you're going to copy that quote word for word. Then you're going to write however. And when you write however, it tells the examiner that you know that interpretation 2 gives a different view. So however, interpretation 2 argues that, you're going to summarise it in your own words, it says, and you're going to copy out one of the quotes that you've highlighted. If you follow that writing structure and you put your quotes in, you are guaranteed 4 marks out of 4. So make sure you learn that structure. 3C also requires a little bit of preparation, so I would spend 2 minutes preparing this. 3C asks you to give one reason why interpretations 1 and 2 give different views about the attitudes of young people towards the Hitler Youth movement. So what this is asking you is not what is the difference, but why they are different. And one of the reasons why interpretations are different is because historians use different sources to come to their decision. So we're going to show that in this exam. So what you're going to do is you're going to match the interpretation to the source that you think the writer could have used. It means that the interpretation and the source are going to be telling you the same thing about the attitudes of young people to the Hitler Youth movement. Now in your booklet you will have 2 sources on the left and 2 interpretations on the right, so you will be able to draw a line from interpretation 1 to either source B or C, depending on which source matches it. And you're going to be able to draw a line from interpretation 2 to either source B or C, whichever one matches it. So do that first in your booklet before you answer the question in the exam. And remember, you're going to have quotes highlighted from the sources and the interpretations already, which will show that they argue the same point because you will have highlighted them in the previous questions. Once you've done that, you've got your plan, you can put that to good use. So you are going to start your answer with the interpretations give different views because they have given weight to different sources. If you just write that sentence without anything else, you're going to pick up a mark. You then, to pick up the other 3 marks, need to prove it. So you would then write interpretation 1 argues that. So you're going to summarise the view, which you've already done in the previous question, which is the same view as in source, and you're going to match it up with the source that shows the same thing. And you're going to put a quote in from the source to prove it. So you're going to write interpretation 1 argues that, which is the same view as in source, either B or C, which says, and you're going to put your quote in. Then you're going to write interpretation 2 argues that, which is the same view as in source B or C, which says. That's all you need to do, and if you follow that structure, you're going to get full marks on that question. Question 3D is the biggest question on the paper. It's worth 20 marks, so 16 marks plus 4 marks for spelling and grammar. You're going to allow approximately 30 minutes for this question, and you're going to need to allow yourself about 5 minutes planning time. So in preparation, the first thing you're going to do is circle the number of the interpretation in the question. So in the question that you can see on your screen on the top left, it says, how far do you agree with interpretation 2 about the attitudes of young people towards the Hitler Youth movement? So you can see there that the interpretation in the question is interpretation 2. So when that comes up in your exam paper, you're going to circle the number 2 and you're going to write the word first above it, because that is the interpretation that you are going to write about first in your answer. Then you're going to look at interpretation 2, because that's the one in the question, and you are going to write information that you know around that interpretation that agrees with it. So for example, interpretation 2 on the screen on the right says the movement became less popular in the late 1930s as the activities became increasingly focused on preparations for war and the discipline became more strict. So if you know anything about the Hitler Youth movement that would support that, you're going to write that next to the interpretation. We've done that a lot in lessons. You've had a lot of experience at annotating interpretations, and that's what you're going to do in your exam. When you've written information around the interpretation in the question, you're going to repeat that for the other interpretation. And so what you'll have are 2 interpretations with lots of your knowledge around the outside to support them, and that becomes the plan for your answer. Once you've got your plan, you're ready to complete your write-up, which will take you approximately 25 minutes. So you're going to start with the sentence, I mostly agree with interpretation 2 about the attitudes of young people towards the Hitler Youth movement. The interpretation says that, and you're going to summarise it in your own words again. Now you've already done this for question 3B and for 3C, so you're going to be really strong with this bit by now. Then you're going to write, the historian says, so you're going to make sure you've got a quote from the interpretation in your answer. And then you're going to support it. So you're going to write, which is accurate because, and this is your chance to show off. You're going to support that with as much relevant information as you possibly can. Then you're going to go back to that interpretation again, and you're going to write, the historian also says, which is accurate because, and again, you are going to support it with as much information about that topic as you possibly can. And that will be part 1 of your answer complete. Now the question asks you to make sure that you use both interpretations in your answer. So you've written about the interpretation in the question already. You now need to write about the other interpretation. So the way that you do this is by introducing it by saying, the view in interpretation 2 can be challenged using the arguments in interpretation 1. The historian says, you're going to copy down a quote from interpretation 1, which is accurate because, and again, you're going to use all of that knowledge that you have about the information in interpretation 1 to support it. The historian also says, bring in another quote, which is accurate because, and you're going to write down all of the information that you know that supports it. And that's section 2 of your answer complete. Now you need a conclusion, which goes back to that question again. So the question is, how far do you agree with interpretation 2 about the attitudes of young people towards the Hitler Youth movement? So you're going to write, overall, I still agree with the view in interpretation 2 because, and you're going to give a reason as to why that interpretation is more convincing to you than interpretation 1. Good luck. Make sure that you have followed the topics in your revision list really, really carefully, that you've used your revision guide, that you've made lots of flashcards and you've had people test you. And if you have any questions, please email your class teacher or me.